is more a personal thing, but it would be really stupid of me to not have you on here and get your thoughts on how the Apple headset is going to change the art landscape.
You know me, I'm long-winded, but like buckle up on this one.
So welcome, Matt. The purpose of this podcast, we had a lot of people in the community that wanted to know a little bit more about the artists behind 6529 meme cards.
Yeah.
We all know quite well the ethos and what we're trying to achieve, but from a personal standpoint, I've gotten to know you over time, and I've gotten to know your work and how passionate and pioneering you are with a lot of it. And I had a few people reach out wanting to understand a little bit more about the artists. So it's great that you've made time to be here. Thank you.
No problem, man. I thought we were just talking MMA this whole time. Now you got to make it all formal on me, right?
Well, you know how I roll anyway.
You better put the MMA part in the beginning. I'll be upset if it doesn't start with that. I'm not going to be happy.
I did the MMA off cam, and then we'll go back to it later.
You can bleep out the part where you said you're a piece of, but
I'll probably say that again. So,
yeah, man, happy to be here. Happy to chat.
You're a good man. Thank you. So basically, I was reaching out to the community and seeing in the OM Discord what people wanted to know, and a couple of people DM'd me. They actually don't know a lot about your background and how you ended up being where you are currently. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your career history and how you ended up in this position.
I'm in the middle of Saskatchewan, Ontario, or Saskatchewan, Canada. So if you want to know how I got here, it's a 30-hour drive. No,
I mean more metaphorically more than physically.
Oh, right. Yeah, man, it's there's a tough question. It's like how far do we go back? I guess, the quick version, I guess, of how I got to this specific spot is, it's probably a series of events that ultimately, started with the pandemic for me. So I think the beginning of it really was starting to learn 3D during the pandemic. I kind of started with this old tutorial called the donut tutorial, and I was kind of learning that, and I had time on my hands. So it was like a lot of people, I was working in tourism, doing video and photo work pre NFTs. And then when COVID hit, I think we all kind of found ourselves, I wouldn't say bored, but we found ourselves, looking for new things to do. And we were stuck inside. We couldn't go to the national park. So I started kind of learning about some new things that were happening. And one of those things was NFTs. And happened to have a friend at the time in Canmore who was also an artist, a photographer. And we just started talking about it and seeing what was going on. And we were jumping in Clubhouse and, Twitter, and sort of learning what was happening in this space. And I kind of dove in at the beginning, just helping her with promo videos, marketing, like that kind of the stuff that I was already doing already. And then when we started to see the NFT space take off, it was like, well, I have this like amazing archive of photography and landscape photos. And she was just like, you got to start, listing these and selling these as NFTs. So I started, and, I made a couple sales and was like, wow, this is such a game changer for me. It's like we went from, having to come up with the funds to go out to shoot a project, or, go to a brand and get sponsorship to go to a place to shoot something that they wanted, to like, oh, here's this image that I created and I could actually sell it as an NFT. And it was pretty empowering and exciting. And from that point forward, I just kind of dove in, and, my history of, in NFTs we can get into, but that was what kind of got me into this place where now I am full-time. I would consider myself, I guess, a full-time artist. And most of my income, my primary focus anyway, is completely in the Web3 NFT space. So that's kind of how I got into NFTs. If you want to know any more further back, we can go wherever you want.
Yeah, I would actually love to know, because your commercial background led you to be in a position to release NFTs. So what were you doing for work before that?
Yeah, it's like this awesome Steve Jobs quote about, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking back. And I guess probably the precipice for me, what kind of got me into this space, was I was actually hired. So my background is actually in marketing, like from an education standpoint, business and marketing. But I found myself working in the tech space. So we're mostly in innovations, startups, web development, that type of projects. And after I had my own startup back in Canada, this is back in 2000, I say probably 2013, 2014. I was recruited and hired by Canon, and I was hired to run a corporate. We called them corporate innovation labs, but basically it was like a startup inside of the company. So 200,000 people. Canon's massive, right there. We know them from photography, but they do medical equipment, photocopiers, imaging equipment, X-rays. When you go through the X-ray machines at the airport, Canon does. They do everything, but innovation wise, it was hard for them. Japanese company, very slow. So there was this trend where these companies would hire like an entrepreneur like me, let me hire my own team. We go through completely different processes. We had our own email servers, our own access to everything. We were kind of like this separate company inside of Canon. And our goal was to research customers, understand what they were looking for, brainstorm new ideas, both hardware and software, and do rapid prototyping. So basically just get them into working function, bring them back to the Canon executives and say, here's this idea, you guys, if you're interested, then we'll help you commercialize it. But it was essentially like a handoff. So when I got hired by Canon, I had not really, I had picked up a camera, like a point and shoot camera on vacations. I had a DSLR camera when I was on a trip to Africa, maybe 5 or 6 years earlier. And I wasn't really I didn't know photography or video. But my job was to learn how to photographers and videographers think, what do they want? So my way of learning that was I just started doing it. So I had access to all the cameras, and every weekend I would go out and I would shoot, and I started learning how to edit photos and composition and all these techniques. And then I started learning video, how to do vlogging and video production, editing, all really part of my job, but it quickly became like a weekend obsession. And then eventually I was I'd be at work, while everyone's talking about, okay, I'm running a team, but I'm also thinking about, I want to go shoot or I want to edit video. And we started doing vlogging in the actual lab. So we were talking about our ideas. It got really crazy. And that was my first real experience doing that type of art. And I guess I just fell in love with it. I ended up quitting that job. I took a big trip across Canada. It was Canada's 150th year anniversary. All the national parks were free. So I sold my condo, quit my job, bought an old Volkswagen camper van, the meme bus, and drove it all the way out to Newfoundland and the east coast of Canada, and all the way out to Vancouver Island on the west coast. And I just shot. I did drone photography, landscape photography. I did lifestyle. I just shot and I posted it all on Instagram. And I grew enough of a following that I started getting offers from, brands. Oh, take some photos, trade for, money or for free stuff. And that kind of started my commercial work in photography. And then, I started getting more gigs with the national parks and provincial parks and tourism boards. And that escalated to the point where right before COVID hit, I was probably making almost more money in the photo and video space than I was in my full-time tech job, that I ended up getting another job at the time, that I was ready to quit. And then COVID hit. And I was like, okay, thank God I didn't, because the first thing to shut down was all the tourism and photos and video projects. But yeah, that was kind of the beginning. And then when COVID kind of cleared up, I still did some professional work, but I started to get obsessed with the 3D stuff, and NFTs were here, and it was if I can avoid working for a brand and doing the work they want instead of just creatively doing what I want, to me it was a no-brainer. So it was kind of all in, and here we are.
It's interesting because I've done a bit of work with you, and I know how passionate you are and how much of a big picture thinker you are. So I'm just curious, how did it feel with Canon that you would produce this whole project and then hand it over to them to execute? Emotionally, did that sit well with you?
No, I mean, there's some massively fun stories. I mean, technically, it's probably whatever NDA I signed is probably expired by now. Won't go into details, but I mean, I'm sure probably people in Canon still talk about me because they gave me an inch, right, and I took a mile. Like they gave me this green light to do stuff, and we just went. We did what really I was hired to do, which was just disrupt, make them uncomfortable, push them as hard as I could, and I got in trouble a ton. They could never really get rid of me because we were producing cool stuff. But yeah, that connection, and there's lots of theories on this now, and it's been no. There's been examples of it working, but like I could, we're not going to get into I know you like this topic, but I could give you a dozen criteria of like what would you need to do at a corporate level for a big company to allow that type of like internal innovation to spin into the bigger picture or bigger company. But for us, we handing it off wasn't really an option because they just weren't equipped. So like say we developed, I'll give you an example. So because it's relevant to some of the stuff I'm working on. We had this idea of, well, stores were going online. So people used to buy cameras in like little, small mom and pop camera stores. They were going away. So people were buying more and more gear on Amazon and, digital platforms. We're like, one of the things in photography is it's really hard. If you can't actually try a lens or a camera, it's like, you don't really know whether it's something you actually want. So we had this idea to create this virtual reality camera simulator. And it was an original project on the Oculus Rift, the original one. And we had amazing, like super smart engineers and interns from University of Waterloo, which is the top engineering school in the world. And we've got with this one kid, I mean, this kid, he's working for like Uber, making flying taxis right now. Like he was brilliant. And he took on this project, and we basically created a full replica of the Canon cameras and lenses inside of virtual reality. So you could like pick up a camera, pick up a lens, snap them together, and then bring it up to your face and look through it. And it was the Canon viewfinder with all the settings, ISO, shutter speed, aperture, and then the lens was actually true to life. So whatever zoom it had, whatever aperture it had, you could see it. And you could tell the difference between, a lens that was a 200 millimeter and a 35 millimeter. And you could see what having a, 1.4 aperture, which is really good for that kind of portrait bokeh blurred background look like. You could see what that looked like. And we would show it to like everyone. I mean, we would show it to like ministers in Canada. People come into and people were like, this is crazy. This is such a cool idea. Then it's like, well, how do you hand that to Canon? They were doing like some crazy mixed reality thing in Japan, but they weren't doing commercial applications. They didn't have a developer account with Oculus. Like they really truly didn't have a capacity. So we would end up just essentially like I would pitch for funding to hire an internal team to develop it further. And it would always be, you could get it so far, but when it came to actually like putting the Canon stamp on it and like publicly saying like, here's this new product, especially with Canon, Japanese culturally is very conservative from a business standpoint. It's a very risk mitigation. Like nobody wants to make a mistake for a huge amount of reasons. And that's where it would run into friction. It's like, oh, it's real now. We don't feel comfortable pushing it forward. So inevitably those ideas would kind of die on the vine as they got to the end. And then we would have other stuff. They'd be like, oh, this is really cool. Let's do this thing. And then we'd bring it, it kind of die in the vine. So the answer to your question is, yeah, like I knew that as cool as it would be to develop something for such a big company, it would probably take, I had some people tell me it might take a decade of me, navigating the corporate environment, maybe going to Japan for a few years, like putting it all on the line to do this. And for what, right? So I can make Canon a little richer. It was like, it didn't seem like a good trade. And ultimately that's, one of the reasons I left was just, it was like, this is not going to lead. We're playing business here. Like we're doing cool stuff, but we're not, this is not real. And you nailed it. I couldn't handle it for long.
I knew that to be the case. Having done consulting myself before, there's nothing worse than laying out the greatest plan in the world and then it not being executed client side. And it's interesting you say all this because the 65 listening to the 6529 and Raoul Pal podcast made me understand that there's a huge gap between commerce and our Web3 environment at the minute. And finding that intersection between commerce and Web3 is going to be incredible, but there's not many people globally that can do it really, really well.
Yeah, it's very tough. It's very tough, and it's definitely not an easy task to do. And if you're got that kind of spirit where you want to see things move quickly, it takes like a special type of patient person to kind of see that through all the way to the end. So yeah, a lot of fun though. We did a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Now, the initial thing that drew my attention to your work was actually your satellite piece that I believe 6529 actually owns from memory.
Yeah.
Can you give the listeners a little overview of what your satellite piece was?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of the origin of the 6529 story for sure. Actually, that's not true. There's one little step before that, but we'll come back to that. That kind of led to that piece. But yeah, so it was called Eyes on Earth, and it's essentially a 24-hour simulation of the 3,000 plus satellites that are orbiting Earth today. And it's broken down into categories. So everything from the satellite dishes that you use for DirecTV, or you probably have a different satellite TV company where you're from, but satellite radio, satellite TV, or certain type of satellites, weather satellites, GPS satellites that you use for navigating, the actual satellites that take images for things like Google Maps and Google Earth, and then of course Starlink, which is the satellite internet that's launched by Elon Musk. And those are all different. They have different orbits, different distances from Earth, and those orbits, have meaning. Like why they orbit a certain way is well known. We're not well known, but it's intentional, right? There's a reason for it. And I had been learning 3D software, so I was kind of experimenting. And at the time, I actually was recruited and hired by a satellite company, in the space industry and tech. So this is all the way through. By the way, for timeline, I've been working in tech and doing the creative video and photo work on the side in parallel. Like I wouldn't even say like moonlighting. I would say like I would be like 8 hours a day doing tech, and then 8 hours a night I was doing creative, all the way up until last year in August when I quit my full-time job to do Web3 stuff full-time. But up to that point, I was working. So I was recruited by the satellite company, and I was trying to understand like the data and like how it worked. And I didn't really know anything about this, to be honest. So I started like looking for visualizations and trying to understand like why are the satellites orbiting Earth this way? Like they do this polar orbit, we call it, where they orbit across like north to south. Like why is the satellite doing that versus orbiting this way? So I started researching, and then I guess along that path, I found some scripts online that would help convert the orbit data into like Blender simulation files. And it was incomplete, but it was like, oh, this is interesting. Like I could bring some of this into Blender and then actually like visualize the satellite. And then I just went down a rabbit hole where I was like, okay, like I started learning Python and editing the code and bringing it in and like modifying it until eventually I actually had this like working simulation of all of the satellites orbiting Earth. Now I'll tell you a story. This is funny because it's a podcast. It's like weird to say this, but I'll tell you because people in Web3 especially will love it. I don't know if everyone else will, but it was just like a technical simulation. And one night I did mushrooms. I started looking at the simulation, and I was listening to this Spotify song. I could still find it. And the Spotify song was playing, and I had like, there was like a glitch in the code where the simulation was like, the satellites, instead of doing like normal orbit, they were like doing this weird kind of looping up and down. And it was like, I was watching it. I was like mesmerized. And I was like, this is such a cool vibe. I'm like, I wonder if I put this to music, it might actually, it's kind of like a piece of art. And that was it. I just, after that, I just was like, this is a great idea. And I started putting sound to it and changing the camera angles. And until I eventually got it to what I wanted and produced that NFT and put it up for sale on Foundation. And it ended up getting bought by 6529. And that's kind of the start of the whole, meme card journey.
And you mentioned something came before that. What was that?
Yeah. So, this is like an interesting topic, and I, kind of want to be, I want to kind of be fair about how I say this. So, um, I worked on a project before this. It was called Free Hawaii Photo. It was a project by an artist named Kath Samard, and Kath and I were very close. She was, we got into NFTs at the same time. Although I focused on helping her with her, kind of marketing video stuff before I did my own. But we're sitting there, and Kath shares with me this story about this photo she had of this like road in Hawaii, and she said this photo has been stolen, used, copied for like 5 years. She never made a penny off it. She even hired a company to go out and try to get money from people that were like commercial brands, like big like travel brands were using it without her permission and without paying her. And she never got a cent. And she had success in NFTs. And we sat down and we were very collaborative, like very good brainstorming together. And we were talking about like what we could do with this image. And I kind of started to formulate this idea of like, well, what if we flip this kind of around instead of fighting people for it? What if we just sell it as an NFT to one collector, and we'll say when they buy it, they agree that we'll make that photo. It wasn't even CC0 at the time. It was just, we're going to have a license that we're going to say like, it's free to use. If you were a brand, if you were a person, we didn't care. Once it sold, the date, like we had it set up on the website, that the second it sold, it was released. And we collaborated on it, we brainstormed around the idea, and the main kind of argument that I had in my head for it was that I think that this approach of basically making this image like NFT for sale, but then licensing wise, like let it go, like just drop it. That was what I believe. And I think, everyone will have different versions of this, but I know for a fact that 6529 saw that. It was actually bought for a lot of money, 100 ETH, by a collector named G Money. And 6529 saw that project, loved the idea, started talking about CC0 and like the role of CC0 in NFTs. And shortly after, he started talking about how he was going to collect CC0 artwork. Now, I gotta tell you, this was really controversial. Like people hated this, and in the photography community in particular, there was a lot of hate on the Free Hawaii Photo project for some other reasons we don't need to dive into. But in particular, there was a lot of hate around the CC0 concept and how it would impact the value of photography. And some people rejected it, thought it was terrible, but 6529 kept preaching of why he thought it was valuable. And a lot of artists, including me, thought, well, like, I mean, I'm pitching this idea. I'm like, this is what we should do. Like, I'm all in. So when I released My Eyes on Earth, I made it CC0, and I said the same thing. Once it's sold, it's available. I put the source code on GitHub. I put it on my website. I have the files available for people to download. Everything was free, all there. And I think, whether I've never actually directly asked him, but I believe that one of the reasons why he purchased that piece was because of that commitment to CC0. And that ultimately had started with the work that I did with Kath on the Free Hawaii Photo project, which, I think, obviously there's lots of things that happen, but I really do think that project And that idea to release that photo in that way was what really started that CC0 movement, especially within the more, traditional, art world in NFTs. So yeah,
It's
there you go.
interesting because CC0 is obviously very controversial for a lot of people,
Yeah,
but at the end of the day, you're trying to rectify a systemically broken system. It's
yeah,
already majorly problematic that people are using this work constantly without you receiving any sort of
yeah.
benefit from it. So you're just trying a different strategy. And I love the whole concept of CC0, and I know 6529 is obviously a huge proponent of it.
Yeah, it was fun it was fun, and maybe one day Kath and I will do like something where we talk about that kind of in our perspectives and how that all went down. But what I remember about it that I thought was interesting was like how emotionally frustrated she was with it. And if you think about it from that standpoint, like as an artist, there's a certain amount of energy you have, right? And yes, we all are entitled. Like we don't want our work stolen, we don't want our work copied, we we want fair value. But to chase that and to fight that is exhausting. And it was a unique idea, and I saw like she had this term that she came up with where she's like just like flip the script, like flip it on its head. And it was totally the opposite. It's the from MMA, it's like the judo, right? It's like a judo throw. It's like using that against them. And it was very stressful for her after because of some stuff that happened, but it was like she's letting it go. Like that was kind of the language we use, like releasing it to the world. Now it's like you actually are now excited when somebody uses the photo as opposed to being upset. And I there's so many psychological like power to that, that even if it wasn't financially as successful as it was, um, it's nice as an artist to put something in the world and then be like, okay, like it's over. Like
I
I don't need
might,
to worry about it.
you
Yeah.
might actually say it was cathartic. Is that a really
Yeah.
that good?
You
Is
can
that
tell
bad?
that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah.
And I was thinking
But yeah,
as
that's
well, if
fun. That's a
if only would have
whole,
sound.
that could be like,
So just going. So then we go from there. Obviously, that was your introduction to 6529, and where did you go from there in terms of the memes?
yeah. So 6529 bought it, and then that was kind of a wild time. Like I did a 24-hour Twitter space by myself. Like like I started it with no one in the room for 35 minutes. I just announced on Twitter, I'm like, Eyes on Earth is away, it's out, it's a 24-hour simulation. To start, I'm gonna do 24-hour Twitter space. Come ask me any questions. And the reason I did it, one, like 24 hours was, it's kind of symbolic. But I always remember like going to um like country fairs and art, like the market. You go to the market and there's always like three artists that are there, and they're just standing there with their paintings or their photos. And like most of the time they're standing alone, right? And they're just there. And then someone walks up and asks them some questions, and then their face lights up, and then that person leaves. But it's not like a big group. It's just like one or two people at a time. And I was like, that like you kind of got to feel that, I think, in Web3. Like I felt like I have to feel that. And I was asking like a good amount of money at the time. It was 6 ETH. And I didn't know if it would sell, but I'm like, I want to feel what that's like. And it started with myself, and then one gentleman from India showed up, and was on stage, just me and him, and he had never spoken on stage before. And he was like, started talking, and he was like, wow, this is cool. And we chatted. He ended up staying with me the entire 24 hours. And I guess because the way that Twitter algorithm worked, all these other guys from India started like getting notifications. So honestly, it was like me and these like six guys from India, and we were all just like talking shit. And then everyone started coming in. We had like 140 people at the peak in the middle of the night, like 3 in the morning. There's people. It was a wild, wild ride. And I think 6 hours left, he bought it. Everyone's celebrating. Everyone's happy. It was one of my favorite moments in life, at least as an artist. And right after he bought it, he kind of said like stay tuned. He's going to write, and he wrote this like incredible thread about like CC0 and citizen based science. and how like NFTs could support, citizen science, and like it was amazing, huge thread. I wrote my own that kind of was a response to him, and then that was kind of the beginning, and then almost like 6 months later, I think he just decided to do this meme card idea, kind of out of nowhere, to be honest. And I talked to him about, I think about the timeline. I think he probably then, between when he bought that piece and the meme cards, he started OM. And in OM, there was all these museums, and we started talking about putting the Eyes on Earth in a building inside of OM. So that was kind of our initial first convos. And then he started the meme cards. He airdropped me a couple. I was allow listed or sent him money. Like, people tell this story all the time. The first set of meme cards was literally people like sending him money, and then he would just like airdrop you the cards. It was wild. So I got into that, and then I think pretty early on, I can't remember exactly when, he asked me to do a card, and honestly, I didn't even like really know what that meant. So I kind of just like said, yeah, sure, but then never really connected on it and didn't really go anywhere. And then he asked me again a few months later, and I think I was the 21st card. And I said, this time I said, yeah, like I said, yes, I'll do it. And then I actually started thinking about what I wanted to do. And I had my idea popped in my head, and then I worked through it with him and 6529er. And then we released it. Like, once he asked me, we were probably a week. We did it really quick turnaround to getting the whole concept together, making it, and then minting it. And then like we kind of connected ever since. Yeah.
And out of that creation, obviously came the meme bus, which has become pretty iconic for anyone that collects. Can you talk to me a little bit about the meme bus and how that idea came to be?
Yeah, for sure. So after Eyes on Earth, I was thinking about, what do I want to do next? Like, what's my next project? And I knew, so, timeline wise, I'd minted a bunch of landscape photos and sold them, done pretty well, like had a pretty reasonable floor price for those photos. And I kept saying to friends, like, I want to retire from photography. It was kind of a joke, but like, I was like, the 3D stuff's interesting to me. I know there's something else I got to learn. Like, I don't know. I just like, I was done with it. I did the 3D render, the Eyes on Earth. And I was thinking of like, what is the next thing that I want to do? I guess I just started pulling together this idea of like, what if I could make landscape photos that were actually 3D renders, and that the satellite data, right, from all those satellites I mentioned, I'd worked in the geomatics industry, which uses data from those satellites to do all sorts of things, including building terrain models. Like, if you go on Google Earth, you can see the elevation of mountains and areas, like all that data. I knew how that worked, and I was like, what if I could just take that data, bring it into 3D software, and make like a landscape photo that was not actually a landscape photo. It was actually a 3D world, like a full 3D scene, which is still hard for a lot of people to grasp what I did. So I'd worked on that, and I'd released. So this is before 6529 asked me about the meme card. I had released my first 3D rendered landscape on Super Rare, and sold that to a collector named Guy Norcal. And that image was a 3D recreation of the Heceta Head Lighthouse on the Oregon coast. Beautiful lighthouse with this like winding road that goes along the water. That was my first piece. And when I got asked to do the meme card, I kept thinking, like, I want the meme card to help explain the 3D landscapes that I was making. Like, I wanted it to somehow connect those two. So I talked to NorCal, and I said, hey, I want to do a derivative of the Oregon piece. And I actually said to him, like, I want to cut you into this piece, because if I took a photo of the Oregon coast and I sold it to a collector as a one-on-one, and then like I turned and did like a different angle or I felt like it'd be kind of like cheap. Like it's like, they, they have this beautiful 101 and now I'm making something else similar and selling it. And I didn't like that. And I said, all right, I'll cut you in. Let's work on it together. So we jumped in a group chat with NorCal 6529, 6529er and me, started thinking of ideas. And all I could think about, because I had driven that road in a van, like in not that Volkswagen, but something similar. And I kept thinking of these old tourism posters that we had. It was like this old 60s style families on a road trip, beautiful Oregon coast. And I started Googling them and I was like, there's something here, like something with this tourism. And then it kind of popped in my head of like, I think I found a tourism poster was like, welcome to the Oregon coast. And then I started thinking like, well, welcome to the open metaverse. And I was like, if I can show people that kind of this joke that one day maybe you'll go on a virtual drive down the Oregon coast in the metaverse, that would like fit the theme of 6529 and, open metaverse was one of his themes. And it just kind of came together in my head. So I originally looked at the bus, the Volkswagen bus as the original artwork. And I took the camera. So this is getting a little technical, but in the 3D render of the Oregon coast, I shot that angle from behind the lighthouse looking down the coast. So I just took the camera and I moved it in the 3D scene to the other side, shooting back towards the lighthouse, which was part of me showing like that this is a dynamic scene. You can move a camera anywhere. So I was like, did that. Then it looked cool. It was like a cool picture of the Oregon coast. I put the Volkswagen bus in and it was like, this is really nice. Then it was like, okay, now I got to do this kind of like underworld version of it flipping into the metaverse. And that's where the bus, I was like, well, how do we make it kind of, modern? And then this concept of like making it hovering and adding all this, artwork. And then I was like, well, I want to put all of like a bunch of little PFP characters in. So I talked to 6529 and he said, well, you can use anything from my collection. So downloading those characters, putting them in the bus. And then I thought, well, maybe these guys are like hijacking artwork, like, steal the memes of production. So I started getting all of this iconic artwork that 6529 owned, and I started putting it in the back of the bus. And then it just like details came in, like the fidenza started to become the paint of the bus. And detail just kept going and going and going. And I kept showing it to like 6529 and 6529er, and you could just tell that they were pumped. We locked it down. We got some music in it, made the little glitch animation, and I was pumped. But at the time, I still didn't really know like about the memes. Like I didn't really understand, to be honest. And you'd have to look back historically. I believe, and this might have been just a glitch, but I'd actually love to know this data because I was meme number 21, and I know for a fact the one before me, number 20, it didn't sell out. It was like it might have been a week that it was still available for mint. And now, right, the memes like instant, they're gone. And I thought, well, this might not sell. And I was nervous. Like I was really, really nervous. I didn't want to do this project and then it not sell out. So I did a big contest and I was like, I'm going to give away 5 of them. I go to my own collection and this thing got hundreds and I think like 1,000 retweets. It was this huge deal. And I was like super nervous. And 6529 and 6529 are just like, dude, like relax. Like it's gonna be fine. And I was nervous. And of course, when it went up for sale, it like sold out in, I think time was a couple minutes. It was really quick. And then I think kind of from that forward, now there might have been ones before that did the same, but it felt like somewhere in that range is when it started to go to like everyone was a sellout. And then it was just like, holy crap, this thing is awesome. And I was so excited to have like a piece of art in this collection, especially season 1. It's been one of the most like rewarding projects and things I've done by far so far in NFTs.
It's interesting because it's one of I think I started minting pretty early, either minting or purchasing, and I'm sure I've got my wallet for verification, but it was one of the first ones when I saw the thread come out about the immense work that it took just to create something like this. And the technical aspects behind it, I loved it. I fell in love with it because I loved the story behind it. So I started, which is part of the purpose of this podcast, because I loved the story behind the artists and the art they're producing, their thought process. How did you come about? How did 6529's ethos impact the work? I just loved it. So I think it was probably the first one that really got me on the hook. That and I loved apocalyptic art forms
Yes.
for
Yeah.
completely different reasons. I just loved it, and I didn't know why I loved it, but I just did, and that was it.
Yeah.
But then this was a different vibe altogether.
Yeah. It was a good lesson because I think my instinct was just to make something quick because you don't know, right? You're just like, you're asked to do a meme card. Like, what's a meme card? You know, you don't, your instinct was, my instinct at the beginning was just to make something, you know? And I think when I started to think about like the PFPs in there and then the culture, and I started, then it kind of hit me how I had to figure out how to like take my world, which was these 3D renders and this artwork, and blend it with the meme world, which was people at the time heavy into PFP collecting and, you know, that whole world over there. And like, how could I bridge that? And now looking at it, that's why I think it worked, because it was a perfect blend of those two. And like, as you say, all the detail was there. And also kind of, you know, not to go too far with it, but just it did kind of reminded me that like that crazy perfection and like a focus on detail that is sometimes disproportionately feels like it's not worth it is like, it would drive me crazy if I look back at that card now and we're like, oh, like, why didn't I? Actually, one thing does drive me crazy because like 6529 had this in the metadata, there's like this specific Fidenza called the Tulip. And it's like in the metadata, it's like there's only, I think, one meme card that used the Tulip somewhere in the concept. And I made like an entire paint job of the bus with a Fidenza, but I didn't use the Tulip. And like, I remember after going, like, it still drives me crazy. I was like, oh, I could have just used that and that would have been a neat extra Easter egg. So anyway, it was a fun, I still smile thinking about it because it was just a wild experience.
Now, I let some of the people in the OM Discord know that we'd be recording this, and I had a couple of
Yeah.
questions from the crew. Now, I'm not sure how much you can share, if there is anything, so don't worry if you can't. But the question was, if you were to release a second meme card, have you thought about what it would be like?
Yeah.
You knew this was
Oh yeah,
coming.
100. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't know. So, like, there's a couple things I'll say. Right? At some point, um, you know, and I should have done this. I should do this soon, but I've so much going on, and it's just priority. Well, like, I will release a 3D version of the meme bus, so you can leak that to them. A lot of people are asking for it. I have it. I think it'll be super cool. Like, as on Cyber is getting bigger, you know, maybe timing wise, there's a huge percentage of people that like it. Maybe we're not there yet, but very soon I think we will be. I've been tweeting for like a year or 2 years. GLB is the new JPG, just because like a GLB file is a 3D file, and it's so interesting because people would always say, like, you know, stealing like right click save as the JPEG, but like GLB files are very different because like you can't. Like, it's not the same. Like, you can technically get it, but it's a file, right? Like, you can't screenshot it. It's a 3D file. And I want to make it available for people to not only have the bus displayed in their on cybers or wherever the 3D tools they have, but to make something from it. And I probably should have done this a while ago. I just, again, timing, and 6529er has been on me about it too. So at some point, 100%, probably on Meme Lab, that's the bus will be available. Secondly, there's intention for me that every 3D piece that I make, so I'm now only, they take forever. So first one was Seseta. Let's call it the derivative or the meme of that piece was Open Roads. I have a new piece out called Cathedral. It's available on Super Rare. I have a concept 3/4 done. That is another kind of follow up to the meme bus using that world. Whether that'll be a meme card, because right now we're still like with 6529, we still aren't doing repeats other than 6529er. I don't think anyone's done repeat other than him. All new artists. So as soon as we flip to original artists, that might go there or it might go somewhere else, but that's a concept. And then I do have an actual like conceptual follow-up that I know that I want to do, but I'm not going to tell anyone what it is. They'll have to wait. Yeah, it's definitely, but it's this like the theme is the same, right? Real world data, real world location. Call it the underworld, call it the meme world, call it meme side, which is a project like another project I love. We won't get into, but whatever it is, it's like a derivative of the original. It's in the world of 6529 in the memes, and I kind of love this heist concept. I love the heist idea of stealing the memes, which is subtle, but it's there, and I think that theme will continue with all that work that I do.
Yeah, I love it.
There you
Just
go.
going back to the conversation you were saying earlier, and I was laughing at the thought of you and 130 random Indian guys chatting shit on
Uh,
spaces, but it's actually a really good representation of how the communication channels have changed between artists and collectors.
yeah.
With Web3 and your thoughts about how everything has changed between being closer with artists and collectors, where do you think that's going?
Sorry, Julie's iPad in the hotel I am wants to share 4 photos. Should I accept it while we're on this call?
Absolutely.
Give my live reaction. I don't know. It's scary.
I don't know. Yeah, stick on track.
I don't know if I have a like an overall philosophical or predictive idea of where it goes. I can only tell you that what I've learned and something I continue to maybe struggle with is just figuring out like how do you apply your natural personality to how that communication happens with collectors. So, for example, I thrive in one-on-one conversations and relationships. Like if I have a choice between going for a beer with one person or going to like a dinner party, I'll pick the beer all day. And one of the things I've enjoyed about Web3 is that I maybe not intentionally at the beginning, but quickly latched onto this idea that I'd rather sell less art at a good price where the collectors were very much committed to me as an artist and my journey, and build one-on-one relationships with those artists over having like a massive fan base with a lot of art where as a community I have to manage. And this jumps a little bit into Discord, which we're in right now. And, obviously we have some history there. It's a weak area for me. It's not something I'm good at. Like to be really honest, like I don't like to be on Discord or Twitter. We talked about this. I have to force myself to do it versus, I've pretty nomadic. I spend probably more than half the year on the road, and I've tried to visit not all of my collectors so far, but I've made an intent. I've met all but maybe a few, and I try to go where they are. So I'm in blank state in the US. Whoever my collector is there, I go for a beer with them, and those are the best conversations I've had and what I value more than anything else. So I think if I was going to answer your question, is here's what I would say. I hope that Web3 gives people the freedom and flexibility to have real relationships in whatever way they value. If you love to have a massive Twitter following and be interacting in that way, great. But if you don't and you want to have one, like I hope that Web3 allows people like that to be successful. And I think I'm a testament to that. Like I think I've done well in Web3. Could I do way better if I maybe did things differently? Maybe, but I'm thinking long term sustainable, and I think that it's changed the game for me when it's when somebody like if 2,000 people like your photo on Instagram, you know, it feels good, right? But it feels very, you know, it becomes like a number, and the value becomes the number. And if you get 1,000 on your next post, you think, oh, people like this half as much as the other one. And that can be dangerous and can start to make you act in a way that is not conducive to creating your best art. And with NFTs, although that still is, that can be a problem, because if you don't sell something or you do, it can make you adjust your style or your approach. But when one person like puts down real money and like a lot of money on something you make, instantly that connection with that person. And even if nobody else in the world likes that piece, like if nobody else cares, like I don't, it doesn't matter, because one person loved it enough to spend the money to buy it and put it up in their home or in their token frame or in their wallet. And it's like, okay, I'll go make another one. So I don't know, man. Does that like,
Yeah,
I don't know where I went with that. But that's my feeling.
no,
Yeah.
it's actually, to be honest, it's my exact thoughts. And I think that we wouldn't have someone like Beeple, for example, if he was worrying about every day someone getting 5,000 likes on his photo. And I think it can be summed up in the fact that you want your audience to be a consequence of your work and not your work to be a consequence of
Yes.
your audience.
Dude, tweet that. Tweet that. Like, if you haven't, tweet it after this, then please, because can you say that again? That summed up everything I've been trying to like get in my head.
Yeah, I just thought of it, to be honest. But you want your audience to be a consequence of your work and not your work to be a consequence of your audience.
Dude. Snip that, Charlie. Clip it. Dude, it's so, you nailed it. And let me just chew on this for a second, because I've watched people on, let me use Twitter as an example, right? I got a good following on Twitter, but it's not like haven't just like watched it like exponentially grow, but I have watched artists who spend a lot of time, engaging and retweeting and sharing. These are good things. Like, don't get me wrong, sharing other artists' work, being a part of a community on Twitter is not negative. But I've watched people spend a disproportionate amount of time on that and grown their audience, and as a result, have sold art. Is what you just said, right? It's like the art, the work is a consequence. And in some ways, they only know this themselves. They've adapted their style and what they create to focus on that audience that they have, what that audience likes. Then on the other hand, if you look at like from a landscape, like if like let's just say you grow your audience, like say 50,000 Twitter followers from being like super engaged on Twitter, like that's positive for your business and your art. But if you go look in the spectrum, the people that have actually done something impactful, right? Whether they have, invented something, created something, done something that transcends that audience, blow through them. Like they're going to blow through them in terms of Twitter following. And I've always thought of it like that. Like, yes, in the short term, you'll always feel a little bit like you could be doing more. But if you hit that thing, you nail that thing that is transcends your work and growth, like overnight, you can lap that. And then you're like, okay, now my audience is a result of my work, not my work is a result or consequence of my audience. So man, I love it. Thank you. I'm going to write that one down and put that. I
Make
mean,
sure.
literally, I like make that my, because it's like a gravitational pull. And me and you have had this conversation. It is constant feeling of, am I doing enough? Never artistically. I never stress and think like, oh man, like I'm not because I spend so much of my day trying to create. I always stress about, am I doing enough on like engagement, community, Twitter, Discord, and yeah. Anyway, I
So
love it.
from a high performance standpoint, the most high performers I've ever met in my life. Excuse me. And for some context to the audience, I was in executive recruitment, so I would meet CEOs around the globe, and all of the high performers always had imposter syndrome to some extent.
Yeah.
So they were always worried they weren't doing enough. And it was part and parcel. It's seen as a negative, but it was a positive driver if harnessed correctly.
No, I just echoing you say it's that balance, right? It's like if in a healthy amount, do you feel inspired to do a little more and push yourself, but if too much can be crippling. And yeah, you got to figure that balance out.
Yeah, for sure. Now, last topic, and this is more a personal thing, but it would be really stupid of me to not have you on here and get your thoughts on how the Apple headset is going to change the art landscape.
Oh man, I'm long. You know me, I'm long-winded, but like buckle up on this one, okay? Um, I mean, this is like what everything I've been working towards, and in ways like my collectors, I would say every one of my collectors knows my vision. And I would say, like, if you pay attention to me, you know my vision, but I wouldn't say like the most people in this space really understand what I'm doing. And I believe, very strongly that I am a huge, like, sometimes I can, I've been very positive, but also can very negative about photography. But a lot of that comes from my own feeling of sometimes it's hard, as a photographer, like if we're two landscape photographers and we're standing on the same hill during a sunset with the same, general equipment. Like, yes, I can edit mine a little different than yours, and you can edit yours different than mine. But like for the most part, it's very hard to distinguish between those two images. And I also believe that, although the photography can capture this moment in time, this like very slice of a feeling of a situation, I don't think that as a medium, it's the end game in terms of how we can relive those experiences, right? So like, is a video better than a photo? Like, I don't know. Like, depends what you're looking for, but generally speaking, you're experiencing or re-experiencing more video. Like a time lapse of a sunset's going to feel more immersive than a photo of a sunset, right? So I've always been like, what's next? Like, what is next after the video? And when I started going down the world of 3D, it started to occur to me like the beautiful thing about 3D is that although photorealism is the holy grail, and quite frankly, from my conversations, my first 3D landscape, I tricked a dozen photographers into thinking it was a photo, which was very fun and exciting. But truthfully, I look at it now and I'm like, well, that's nowhere near a photo. And it's just your brain's constantly like, how do you get to that place where people can't tell the difference? And now AI is, in some ways leaped over that, and some people can't tell the difference between AI and a photo. But stick with me. The beautiful thing about creating a 3D landscape, as I do, is that it's completely dynamic, meaning that you can move the camera as much or as little as you want in the scene. So you can move the camera from this angle to that angle and get parallax. You can move it up and down and see the height of the elevation, shift between very shallow, like if you're, low on the ground, you see very shallow horizon, where if you're in like a drone photo, you see more of the mid-ground. You can move the camera to the other side, but more importantly, you can fully adjust the weather, the time of day, the lighting conditions. You can do anything. But it takes time to recreate the scene to give you the ability to do that. But that's what I've been doing. I go to his place, I capture all this data from satellites, airplanes, ground photos. Like, I do crazy amount of data collection, and then I sit down and I recreate that scene in 3D. And then what the audience sees up to this point is a still render. But that still render is from within a 3D world. And what's going to get really awesome, and the reason why I've been putting so much effort into this, and the reason that I think, I said from the beginning, it's like 3 to 5 year play from when I started, is when that Apple headset and other headsets hit critical mass, which I would say that Apple Vision Pro is 3 years, 3 iterations, let's call it. Okay. So when the iPhone came out, first iPhone, it was like only the geeks were like lining up for that thing, right? No one else cared. Everyone made like people like, what do you want that phone for? I got my BlackBerry. You don't even have BBM. Nobody cared. And then it was like second one, it was like, oh, like some of the more technical people were like, this is interesting. I want to get one. Like the third one, by the third one, it started to be like, oh yeah, you got to get an iPhone. And then now it's like, I mean, it's like second nature. Like everyone's got an iPhone or an Android. It's there. Okay. Third generation of Apple's Vision Pro, won't be Vision Pro, probably be Apple Vision or whatever it is. By the third one, it's going to be normal. I've never been more confident. I know everyone will tell you no one wants to wear a headset. I'm telling you that when we look back in 5 years from now, let's go 5 years from now, you watch this video, you people will laugh at the fact that us idiots were standing there staring at this, like typing on this little box and like looking at people were like, this is the dumb, like, I can't believe that people did this. It's so long, but 5 years we'll look back. 3 years, 3 generations, I think it'll hit mass adoption. So in the release of the Vision Pro, and I mean other 3D headsets are doing this, there's this thing in the keynote, if you watch it, where they got the headset on and they're in their house and they turn the dial and the dial puts them in this lake. And you can tell from the video, although it was in 2D, that you could move a little bit in that scene. And that's exactly what I'm doing now. I don't know what the technology is. I think what they've done is just taken a video of the lake from like a stereo video so that it gives a bit of depth and you can kind of shift. But what we'll see, but what I'm doing is that, but plus full control over the weather, the lighting conditions, the position. And I think that when that headset comes out, I know for a fact, I can tell you right now, I will have, if they have it available, I will have a 3D scene available in that headset. And then 3 years from now, by the time that comes out, I hope that I'll be the best in the world, like at doing that. And I'll be able to recreate these 3D scenes from the most beautiful places around the world so that if in the event, of course, it's better if you can go there in person, right? If you can go there in person, you can go to the Grand Canyon, you can go to Moraine Lake in Canada, you can go to the Great Barrier Reef, whatever you want. If you can go in person, do it. It's better. But man, like what percentage of the world can do that? Right? What percentage of the world can actually go and, people, if you're bad health, you don't have the financial means, you're aging, there's so many reasons why you can't see the world. And even if you don't have those things, most people are too comfortable to actually go do them. So with the next best thing, might have been a video, maybe a 360 photo or a video, but that I'm telling you that when these immersive environments come out and you're able to go in there and feel like you're standing in that place, it will be the next best thing to being there. And although right now, $3,500 for a Vision Pro, well, that's not cheap, but man, 5 years from now, you'll get the last generation, 2 generations before. It sounds crazy, and yes, there's still a huge percentage of the world that can't afford an iPhone, but you'd be surprised. You go to some of the most poor places in the world, and even though like there's all these things that are just people can't afford, the conditions are bad, people still have the phones. And I really do believe that this will allow more people one day to be able to experience some of the most amazing places on earth, in the next best version of actually being there. So there you go.
Yeah,
That's what I think.
I love it. And I agree completely with you. And I just love your passion about it. I think anyone can sense that you'll be a success. You're too passionate about it. You work too hard. You've been doing this for years. So when this all comes around, I feel like it's just going to unlock an incredible amount of opportunity for you, which I'm excited to see.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I appreciate it. And like, the hardest part of it is knowing that, I guess it's like in some ways, the hard part is like knowing that there's quicker ways to make money now and to be successful now. But a lot of those things take me away from like the bigger work that I want to do to get here. And it is very technically like it's it's technically very difficult, and there's a lot of experimentations, and there's not a lot. There's no reference. Like I was saying to someone the other day, that I keep looking for like examples of photorealistic landscapes based on real world, like something I can like copy someone's technique, and there's nothing I can find that's, kind of, so a lot of it's just me figuring it out. And yeah, I know eventually, I know it's going to pay off, but yeah, it's just keep my head down and focus and keep doing it for sure.
And keep going, and remember your old mate Stu when you get there.
Of course, man.
So,
No, of course.
awesome, mate. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know what you and I are like. We could speak for hours on end, but I suppose we've
Yeah.
got to wrap it up at some point.
I was ready. I was thinking about it. I was like, this dude's either gonna have this like down to like a nice tight, hour or 45 minutes, or like we might talk 4 hours. I didn't know. So
Oh, I
we
would
do this
have talked 4 hours if I didn't have other places to be. I would have talked for 4 hours.
of course, man. This is awesome. By the way, glad you're doing this. I can't wait to like, I hope you keep doing this. I can't wait to kind of hear the stories of some of the other artists. And yeah, man, excited to do this with you.
All right, Scopes. Thanks so much. I'll see you soon, buddy.
All right, brother. Yeah.
See ya.